My name's Edward Montgomery. I'm the Dean of the Georgetown Public Policy Institute. And on behalf of the Institute, we're honored to have a guest here, Congressman Dingell. And I will go into his introduction in just a second. This chat we're going to have today is very much in the spirit of what GPPI is trying to do, in which we are trying to produce the leaders of tomorrow in public policy, in terms of our students, to have our faculty engaged in policy analysis and policy and research, and then to be the convener where we bring together those who are actually doing policy, have been doing policy, are doing the policy of the future, to be part of conversations around the nations of the issues of today. So we're very honored today as part of that to have Congressman Dingell here into our new space. It's just recently renovated. The policy school just moved into this. We've actually got the art back up on the wall, so we're very honored that the president has supported us and all that. This is part of our movement from an institute to a school. As we move into new space, we've added 4 new faculty this year. We've added distinguished Congressman Dorgan joined us this year as well as an appointment. Again, all part of expanding the program at GPPI. Having the Congressman Dingell here today has been a particular honor for me. I got to work with him when I was in the Obama administration with the Auto Task Force, and particularly around the issue of the recovery of auto communities. And the Congressman was a tireless champion of how to rebuild this auto industry in this country, how to help the men and women who had worked in those industries and the communities that they were supported. So I really need to thank him, because without his support, the job I tried to do just couldn't have possibly been done. But he has always been a leader in that kind of issue. He is, right now, I've been told, the longest serving member of Congress, not only the longest current serving member of Congress, the longest serving in the history of the House of Representatives, 29 terms. He just got reelected to that. Overwhelming support from the people of the 15th District in Michigan. Shows they have good taste up there in Michigan. And Wayne County, Monroe County, Washtenaw County, in reelecting the congressman. The congressman's career is not just distinguished by its longevity. Quite frankly, it's distinguished even more by the quality of the kinds of things he's been able to do. If you think about pretty much all of the major legislation that's come out affecting the economy, affecting energy policy, affecting environmental policy, affecting commerce, affecting food and drug safety, he's the man behind it. Everything from the Clean Air Act to building a wildlife refuge to the recently passed health care legislation, John Dingell has been instrumental in getting all of those things done. And so he has had a very distinguished legislative career. That came after being a member of, I think, what Tom Brokaw calls the greatest generation. Served in World War II as an 18-year-old recruit, rising quickly up to second lieutenant status in just a few brief years. And then he really distinguished himself because he came to Georgetown. And he was an undergraduate here and was a chemistry major, I believe, before going on and getting a law degree. And so he's a Hoya through and through. So we're very honored to have him. I would be remiss if I didn't say he also had the good sense to marry another powerhouse and Hoya, Debbie Dingell, who has had a very distinguished career in her own right. And so they're a Hoya family. We're honored to welcome him back to Georgetown to talk with us today. So, Congressman, thank you for being here.
I'm afraid what I'm going to say can only spoil that wonderfully gracious introduction. Dr. Montgomery, thank you. And I want to thank Judy over here for the great work that she's done. And also to say thanks to you, Scott, for your kindness. And those wonderful young people that waited outside in the cold for me. That was, I've got to say, a wonderfully gracious thing. May not have been too smart, but it was a great idea. It was a great thing. As you mentioned, the lovely Deborah is a Georgetown grad, and she and I both have 4 degrees from this wonderful school. She has one that I don't quite understand, and then her undergrad degree, she got a master in some darn thing. And I have a law degree and a degree in chemistry, and they're matters of great pride. I have a long speech here, which I think is going to be quite unsuited to the occasion. So with your leave, Dr. Montgomery has suggested that I should talk to you about the Congress and what I feel about it. I also would like to observe to you that I am probably the luckiest of men. I first attended Georgetown when we had 100 students on campus. This was in 1944. And the bulge was coming on. We had thought that it was very possible that we could lose the war. Earlier on, as I mentioned, there were just 100 students on the campus, plus a few what they called ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program people. They hauled them all back into the Army and put them into the infantry for the Battle of the Bulge, which I missed because I got a case of meningitis and wound up 2 months in the hospital. And then I ran on down into infantry OCS, where was probably it was even greater than the educational experience I got here at Georgetown, because they taught you how to be men and to be leaders, and it's something that I've always greatly prided myself in. Then I came back, and Georgetown was very kind. They gave me credit for a full year, even though I didn't have it coming. And I was able then to graduate in 4 years, where I worked as a ranger for the Park Service during the summers. And then I did that same thing while I was at law school. And that was the only job I've ever had that I liked better than the job I have now, because they paid me to trap bears and ride horses and to check the fishing in the high lakes and do trail patrolling and fight fires. I couldn't believe that they would honestly pay people to do that kind of work. Then I went on to become a law clerk to a great federal judge, Ted Levin, back home. And I got a building named after him, and then I had the privilege of being a practitioner in the law and finally an assistant prosecutor, and then Dad passed on and I ran. And I was like all the other members of Congress. I thought I knew everything. I had to come down here and learn that I didn't really know everything. And the happy experience is that the more elections I go, the less I think I know, which is very good. I've also found out that I'm a member of no organized political party. I happen to be a Democrat. Dr. Montgomery wanted me to talk about the Congress as it was. And it's a fascinating place. It changes with the time. It changes with the people. And it is, whether you like it or not, a group of public service. We do our darndest to see that we carry out the wishes of the people, which sometimes are good and sometimes are not. That in these times, it seems that the nation is very evenly divided, and there's a very nasty atmosphere out there, which amplifies itself very significantly in the Congress. And if you look, you'll find that things are done and said in the Congress that in my earlier days and in the days of my dad or Rayburn or John McCormick or any of the giants I knew simply would not have been acceptable. A part of this, or a good part of it, is due to the fact that the Congress has, of course, changed. We've become a 3-day-a-week job instead of a 5-day-a-week job. We used to have what we call the Tuesday through Thursday club. They were very much looked down upon because they would head home on Thursday and get here on Tuesday. And that didn't seem to be the way the business could be done. And very truthfully, the Congress suffers because we lose the element of trust, friendship, that is so necessary to working across the aisle. We also lose the knowledge that comes from working harder and more intensely on legislation. And of course, the committees have grown so large that now the subcommittees on the committee that I serve on are bigger than the committee was when I first went to the Congress. And one of the reasons that they set up subcommittees in the Congress was they found that they simply could not do the business that they needed to do with the very large entities that they had in the committees. And of course now they have sort of changed that, and I guess we're going to have to set up subcommittees or do some other darn thing like that, or perhaps do what appears to be the sign, and that is moving the business of the Congress into the Speaker's office. That is, of course, a very bad thing, because the Congress is an entity which represents all the people, and every one of us are entitled, not by our own virtue, but by reason of the number of people we represent, close to 700,000, to be heard and to have the voices of our people heard through us. Now, this is all going to change again when we have a redistricting, which will be coming up this year. And that will lead to some very strange results with members running against members. And I've had to do this on 2 separate occasions. The Congress, as I mentioned, has changed, and we're trying to see, I think, a little bit about how it's changed. The first race I ran in, I spent $19,000. I didn't think there was that much money in the world. But as it turned out, 10 years later, I had to spend $35,000 to, and in the first one, I beat 23 people, including a former mayor and of the city of Detroit, and national commander of the American Legion, and a gaggle of ministers and lawyers and everything else. Now, don't think I did this on my own ability. I did it on the name of a great congressman who was my father, and which is why timing in this world is so very, very important. I timed my race right, and of course I timed my choice of fathers very well, and you'll see, as my friend Jay Rockefeller one time observed, he said that there were a number of ways of becoming wealthy. He said you could go out and make your money properly, or he said you could inherit. He had chosen the easier and the wiser course in inheriting. But once you get there, you do have to earn your keep. And I'm pleased to say that because of the teaching and the instruction I had, people like Rayburn and McCormick and the giants, I learned to do the business the way it should be done. And it gave me a tremendous advantage over a lot of the new members who have come in, who haven't had the privilege of those kinds of association or the learning that those people can get. And the Congress is an entity which is rather curious. It does have a personality. If you watch, some days it'll adjourn for reasons that nobody can explain, except it just was in a lousy mood and they couldn't legislate that day. And you will see that happen, and the surprise on the face of all concerned when this happens. But it does reflect, as I'd said, the will, the wishes, and the concerns of the American people. And this shows up in the election. Now, I want it known that there is a great and enormous wisdom on the part of the American people. They usually are much ahead of their legislators. And this leads to something which we have to have, which we seem to be losing. And that's a very honest dialogue between the people, and between the people and their government. And unless we can restore that, it's my feeling that we are not going to become, again, the kind of nation that we want. I don't want you to think that the Congress has ever been an entity which was full of namby-pambies. There have been violence, shootings, canings, and other acts of violence there, including some appalling behavior on the floor, including fistfights. In the old days when my dad was there, the sergeant at arms would have to go down from time to time to break up fistfights. And we don't have a good, honest fistfight anymore on the floor, but we have different forms of nastiness which cause the Congress to be less than functional. My own thesis was that the best way for the Congress to legislate is to start at the middle and work out. This allows everybody to have a full chance to be heard. And in doing, when I was chairman of the Committee on Commerce, which is, in my view, the greatest of the committees of the Congress, we always saw to it that we started in the middle and worked out. And the end result was, although it took a long time, we ultimately wound up with overwhelming support on the legislation, including unanimous support on things like food and drug reform, the biggest in the history of food and drug, and consumer product safety, where the legislation actually came out of the committee unanimously, and in the case of consumer product safety, actually passed the House unanimously because members worked together. And I've seen the day, and I'm very proud of it, when members would be able to talk with each other. I had two members that were particularly good friends of mine, both very conservative. One of them was Bud Brown from Ohio, and he and I worked on energy in the early 70s. And Bud said to me one day, he said, "Dingell, my wife is going to divorce you and divorce me, and she's going to name you as a correspondent, because we'd been working so hard together." The other was a little guy, kind of a dried-up fellow from Iowa, who was sort of the Republican corporate gadfly. It was his job to make life miserable for Democratic speakers, the great ones like Rayburn and McCormick, who were my mentors and very, very dear to me in each case. And one day, they told me he was going to be on the ranking Republican on the subcommittee I ran. They said, "This is terrible." I said, "Oh, hell no, it's not terrible." They said the same thing about Brown, and I said, "No." And Brown had probably the most acerbic sense of humor in the whole of the Congress. And I said, if I can sell those two guys on legislation, I'm not going to have any trouble with the right wing. So we became a really important team that moved things forward. And Brown and I would sit there sometimes when we were working on legislation about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'd say, "Brown," I'd say, "make this motion." And he'd say, "Dingell, why the hell should I make that motion?" I'd say, "Because I'm telling you to, and because it'll speed things up." And so he'd do it. And I remember we worked on a number of bills, and somebody one day said, "Dingell, what a remarkable thing. You got this clean air bill off the floor in 13 hours. I said, "Well, that was very nice." I said, "It only took me 13 years to do it." And what I'm saying to you is, it's remarkable the amount of work that you have to do to assemble the kind of support that you wanted, to hear the kind of people that you need to hear on both sides. And every member is entitled to be heard. And surprisingly enough, even some of those that I happen to have the least high regard for can sometimes come forward with a very, very important point. And I remember my friend Gross one time got up on the floor when John McCormick was referring to how the high regard in which he held all members of the Congress. And so Gross popped up real quick when McCormick, who was sitting in the chair, said he had the highest regard for all members. And Gross says, "Does that include the gentleman from Iowa?" And John McCormick, without batting an eye, looked at him and said, "The Speaker has the highest personal regard for all members of Congress and the minimum highest personal regard for the gentleman from Iowa." But the Congress has, I hope, great promise. In the old days, I always said that two things happened in the Congress that caused terrible problems. The first was when they air conditioned the place. In the old days, they used to come in March, and they'd leave punctually the 1st of June. The March date was fixed because it took so long for people to get from where the elections took place, which took place in November, to Washington, so it'd give them a long time to get here. And that led to lame duck Congresses with all kinds of curious abuses. But in any event, they did away with that in the 30s because they found that those abuses had become sort of intolerable. In any event, they would, of course, adjourn because it got hotter than billy goat hell in this town, as you all very well know. And so they all headed for back home so that they could cool off, and then they would come back for special session. But they didn't give us, I remember when Dad came to Congress, he had one electric fan, one staff member, one room on the 5th floor of the Cannon Building, which had to be hot and miserable because that was the worst place in any event, when they air conditioned it, of course, then they began staying the year round, and that was a good thing because they still didn't give us a lot of travel money. So we had to stay here and work with our colleagues. Nor did they televise the darn place. And so now when you watch my colleagues on the floor or in committee, you will see them looking at the camera. They aren't looking at each other. They're looking at that doggone camera. If you watch them on the floor, you'll see them down there in the well, and they'll be looking up at the camera, which is in the gallery, rather than looking at their colleagues. That's a bad thing. And to encourage the Congress to work the best, we have to see to it that they will have pressures to work well with each other. And of course, when I was a boy, the kids would play together. The Democratic boys and the Republican girls, or the Republican boys and the Democratic girls would go out together, and the members would travel together and do all kinds of things. And I always thought that it was a pretty doggone good idea that the Republican boys should date the Democratic girls because they were entitled to some fun before they started out earning a living. But, Doctor, I think I've consumed more than my 15 minutes, and maybe we ought to start on more serious business here.
Okay, well, thank you for that. We're going to open it up to questions, and I think people are submitting them as we speak. You had raised in your remarks the issue of working together, and we'd had earlier in the year Senator Mitchell, former Senator Mitchell, and God, I'm blanking on who the other, Baker, I'm sorry, Baker came, and they were asked the question about working together and bipartisanship. Is it dead? Could it come back? And so my question to you is, as you either look at the current Congress or you look at the trends in the nation, do you think bipartisanship, even when people fundamentally have disagreements, can return to Congress, will return to Congress?
Well, it was never dead, and it's not now dead. And it will have to come back when the need is there. I watched it during the Cold War, and I watched it when a fellow by the name of Vandenberg, who was a conservative isolationist, worked closely with Roosevelt and Truman to establish the post-war security of the nation and the basis of peace. That's just one outstanding example of where it occurs. And I've always been able to elicit this from my Republican colleagues, not all the time, because every once in a while you just got to fight. But it will come back. It should come back. And one of the things I've been talking about has not been the absence of it, but I've been talking about the pressures that make it go away as opposed to encouraging it to be there and present. By the way, I didn't introduce, I've got two of my staff members, Michael Robbins over here, Chief of Staff, and who attended Georgetown too, and Betsy Barrett over in the back. She's a very pretty young lady that handles media and stuff for us.
As you look at the current session that's coming up, do you have a sense of what's going to be the big issue? Is it all going to be tied up in budget and health care reform, repeal kinds of work, or do you see other big issues coming out of this next time?
Well, there's going to be all kinds of big issues, but I think clearly the biggest of the issues is going to be budget. Budget and balancing the budget. You have heard the lines laid out on that question, and you should kind of, as you go through your studies, you should kind of look to see what it is will cause or form or frame the issues. You heard the President's State of the Union speech. It was a very good speech. I won't say it was great, but it was good. But I will tell you that you should always listen to the President because he pretty much defines the issue. He's got what Teddy Roosevelt used to call the bully pulpit. And if you listen, you have heard a tremendous demand for cutting expenditures. But unfortunately, if you look, you're finding that the cutting is not going to be, from what I'm hearing, anything other than just kind of a brutal cutting with a meat axe, as opposed to a surgical work with a scalpel, which is always the better course. They're talking about going back to this level of 2008 or something like that, or to cutting by a certain percent or something of that kind. And that might work if you're not in one of those areas where they're going to cut. You might not agree that this is such a doggone good idea in areas of health or social things or education or national defense. And so it's got to be approached with a remarkable degree of care. One of the things that the President said in his State of the Union message, which I thought was very important, was he is going to try and cut, but he is also going to try and keep the investments that are so necessary for the United States to do the things that we have to do to remain where we are as the greatest and the strongest and the most important nation, which has enormous leadership responsibilities in the world. In other words, we're going to have to educate our young people. We're going to have to see to it that our people are healthy and well educated so that we can compete. We're going to have to see to it that we rebuild our infrastructure. And this is going to require a very, very nice handling. And I would remind those who have the doubts that this is possible. And Doctor, you're talking about bipartisanship. When President Clinton left, you'll remember it was a rather bitter time in this country. He was one of the two presidents who's been impeached. And I won't discuss the reasons therefore, but I'll just simply say that that manifested a high level of bitterness. You know, he's one of the three presidents impeached. But when we finished, because the two parties had worked together, when the Democrats left office and the Republicans came in, there was a $2 trillion surplus. And that $2 trillion surplus is gone. But I believe that the kind of working together that you saw during that time is a real possibility, and it's something that we must strive for, because we had one civil war, and I don't think we need any more, particularly while we've got two wars going on over there in the Middle East, and a terrible, terrible threat to this country from the terrorists.
We have some questions from members of the audience that I thought I'd ask. I would have written this one myself. What has been done in your district as part of the automobile industry recovery, and what more could be done to assist the residents?
Well, at a given time, you need government to do something to help. Abraham Lincoln once observed that the government was there to do for the people what they could not so well do for themselves, or which they could not do for themselves. And if we keep that in mind as to what government should do, I think we'll come to a pretty good understanding of where government should be. The government has gotten the 3 U.S. manufacturers going again. And they're doing well. There's hiring, and I could give you a lot of statistics, which I like to give as I travel around my district, but I'm not going to bore you with them. But the companies are seizing the opportunity now, which is a remarkable thing. And that is very good, because if you look, one of the things you and I worked on, Doctor, when you were in government, Section 136 loans were used for the manufacture of the 2 cars of the year, the Chevy Volt and the big Ford SUV, which is the truck of the year. And they were made in American plants under American leadership by American workers. And those are the cars of the year. They are the best. And the Jeep Cherokee was right behind them, and is one of the reasons that Chrysler is seeing a significant beneficial change. Now, having said these things, there's a lot more to be done. But, and it is now the task of the auto companies working together with the unions and with their suppliers and dealers to see to it that what has to be done to restore the auto section of our manufacturing industry in this country goes forward. Now everybody else is going to have to pitch in. The suppliers are going to have to pitch in. We're going to have to see to it that the government makes a decent climate by addressing tax and regulatory structure, which you have to deal with on a continuing basis. Because what might be a good regulatory structure today might be a rotten one tomorrow. And the same thing with regard to tax. So the Congress is supposed to do this. That's called oversight, which I used to very much enjoy doing, because you could bring folks up and encourage them and take a look at what they're doing and see, you know, by golly, are you doing the job you should?
Mm-hmm. On those lines, do you worry that the government is getting too big, too intrusive in people's lives?
No. The government, you know, this government belongs to everybody in this room, belongs to everybody in this city, everybody in this country. And if it doesn't do what it should, it's because we're not insisting that it do what it should. But that's also in good part because we don't inform ourselves of what it should be doing. Everybody says, oh, regulations. Well, we kill 3,000 people a year from bad food. We put 168,000 of them in the hospital from bad food. Are we going to have Food and Drug or not? Chinese are sending melamine over here in milk. That poisons kids, poisons a lot of kids in China. We're going to have a Food and Drug to protect us against that. Pharmaceuticals. Bad pharmaceuticals come in from China. They killed about 80 people with a blood thinner. Do we need somebody to protect us against it? You darn bet. Do we need clean air? You betcha. Go over to China and try and breathe. You could saw that air over there up, dip it in ink, and sell it for fuel. I mean, it's we need an EPA. You need safe drinking water. When I went to Congress, there were shoals of sewage going out into the Mississippi River a mile long. Now, the people of about a quarter of the United States got their water out of that. So when somebody flushed their toilet up in Minneapolis, a couple of weeks later in New Orleans, they knew what they'd had for dinner. So you have to do some intelligent things. We have to build roads, we have to build sewers, and we have to do all the things that have to be done so that this can be the kind of country we want. Is it going to cost something? You dang bet. These things cost. But the taxes that you pay are supposed to be used for doing the things that you need to have done so that you can have a decent, civilized society. And I remember Charles Evan Hughes, and I get in trouble with my wife all the time for saying this, but he says, you know, taxes, I love them, because with taxes, we buy civilization. Now we're going broke on health care, as Judy can tell you. If we don't, our health care costs are going up twice as fast in the United States as anywhere else in the world. And they're twice as much already as they are in any other country in the world. If we don't do something, by around 2070, just about every nickel we make in this country is going to go to guess what? Health care. Can't afford that. So we have to deal with these problems. We can argue about how it is, but we also got to do it. So and you want to take a look, by the way, at the health care bill. It's going to say that you can stay on your parents' health care till 26. It's going to say they can't impose pre-existing conditions on you when you get out. It's going to say everybody's got to have health insurance, but one of the reasons that we have to do that is because there's a lot of people that are freeloading, and everybody else in this room is paying $1,000 a head to take care of those folks that are getting their free care at the emergency rooms. So take a hard look and understand as you go about your business. Look underneath some of the more extreme claims that are made, and you'll find you've got a pretty doggone good government, a pretty open government, and a pretty honest government.
Okay. Question, is Michigan able to have a sustainable economic recovery without the resurrection of Detroit?
Well, Detroit is a terrible problem. There's an article in the Washington Post this morning about our new mayor. Frankly, he's got an unholy mess on his hands. And my dad used to like to say, you know, you can't sit in this boat with me and look at me and tell me, but pardon me, Dingell, your end of the boat is sinking. And the simple fact of the matter is Michigan cannot exist with Detroit being in the shape in which it is. They've got a $5.7 billion debt, and I think I have a better chance of being Pope than they have of paying it off under current circumstances. And so the nasty thing about it is that we have provisions in the law to address that. But and they involve a receivership, or not a bankruptcy, but I haven't yet seen a governor that wants to appoint somebody and get blamed for appointing somebody to fix that mess in Detroit. They've done it in other cities, Rouge, McCourt. But I'm just thinking that every governor is afraid, and they're going to put shin plasters on it as long as they can get away with it. But the simple fact of the matter is that they're going to have to do something about it, and they better start now, because we have not got that government in the city of Detroit, either in the schools or the city government, to the point where they can sustain themselves under current situations.
I guess a related question, are you generally supportive of Rick Snyder's policy to stimulate the Michigan economy?
Well, I didn't support Rick. He happens to be a friend. The answer is I haven't yet seen his policies. I want to. We've already had meetings with him. I intend to help him, and I intend as the dean of the delegation to lead so that he is helped in his undertakings. I will be interested to see whether some of the right-wing folks that he has in control of the legislature will let him be the Rick Snyder that he wants to be or that we want him to be. And in any event, we've all got to pitch in and work together. We have a state legislature, rather a state senate, that seems to be against everything, including the sun rising tomorrow. And so we're going to have to worry about getting them to go along with some of the things that he wants to do. Now, for example, he really hasn't come forward with anything that he wants done. And some of the things that you're seeing that are good, that are happening in Michigan, hiring and things of that kind, are coming about from TARP, the Troubled Asset Recovery Program, and also from the ARRA, or the Recovery Act. Those two things are providing the basis for capital moving into the state, for loans and capital coming into businesses in Michigan, and for jobs, including jobs at the municipal level, police and educators and folk like that. When that runs out, we're going to find out just how well our new governor is going to do. I repeat, I want him to succeed because I've got 700,000 constituents who are dependent on his wisdom and success. But I'm hopeful that some of those Stone Agers up there in the legislature will perhaps be motivated to be just a wee bit more open and cooperative than I have seen them be in the years that they've run the state senate, which goes back to the days of John Dingell.
With regard to the Washington, D.C., do you favor statehood? Do you favor affiliation with Maryland or with Virginia? What do you think about the future of Washington, D.C.?
You're going to hear a conservative speak here. Way back when the United States was very young, we adopted a constitution. If you read the constitution, it says that there will be one area not to exceed 10 miles on a side, which will be the peculiar responsibility of the Congress. That came about because the Congress got literally driven physically out of Philadelphia. And so they were writing the Constitution at that time. They thought, well, by golly, we better at least protect the Congress against this kind of thing. So they put it in. And I have supported home some elements of home rule. I have not supported others. But I don't see any reason why the federal government should change this. I've found no one who is forcibly detained in the District of Columbia. They can move into Maryland or Virginia and vote anytime they're minded. But they also can stay here and get about $800 million that the federal government gives to the city of Washington to help pay for the cost of government. Now, if they give $800 million a year to Michigan and to Detroit, by jing, we could solve Detroit's problems overnight. So I'm not really content with the way things are going here, but I don't know how to get it better. But we've had some severe troubles with the schools here, just about as bad as we get back home. And I remember that they've had troubles. They couldn't. We had to give them money to get themselves set up to audit their books. And we found that they couldn't even, by golly, keep track of their parking meter collections. Now, maybe they fix a few of those things, and I'd be willing to talk to them about doing a little more in terms of giving them greater responsibilities. But for now, I think that we should have a place where your federal government is not going to be subject to the pressures and the whims of the place where they meet.
Do you see the new health care legislation evolving, or how do you see it evolving over time?
Much like Social Security changed from its initial construct and grew, and Medicare, Medicaid. How do you see the new health care legislation?
That's a very good question. Let's go back to Social Security and Medicare. These are actually two of the most successful programs in history. Social Security will be good till 2070. Medicare for another 10 years or so, and we added an additional 9 years to that by the way we wrote the health care bill. So they're in pretty good shape, and a 5-year actuarial prediction is a pretty good one for insurance purposes. So you can see that Social Security, which has been in place for over 75 years, is doing pretty well, as is Medicare. Now, we've had to make a couple of small adjustments from time to time to see to it that they both are okay, and we probably have to make a couple more. But if you look, they have been tremendous helps in terms of protecting our senior citizens and retirees. And just since you guys are all wonderfully young, which makes me envious, I will observe to you that when your time comes to get Social Security, you can bet it'll be there for two reasons. One is that it is a remarkably successful program actuarially, and two, that frankly, politically, nobody in this country dares allow this to fail. We can go in greater detail to it. With regard to the health care bill, one of the things that we need to have in bipartisanship is working together. We couldn't get a single Republican vote for the bill in the House. They just simply said, we ain't going to have anything to do with it. So we said, well, we'll write a bill without you and send it over to the Senate. So we got to the Senate, and then the Senate performed its magic on this in the curious way they do, which nobody can explain. But the upshot of the whole business was that they wrote a bill which they then sent back to us. And we found some little mistakes in it, but we found that generally it is a sound bill. And curiously enough, things like the mandate and universal coverage were things that were pushed forward by my good friend Bob Dole and Senator Chafee and a number of others. In any event, they haven't found anything that people are really complaining about, excepting universal coverage, which you have to do to make it work. If you don't have everybody covered, you don't have the base, and you can't impose that on the insurance companies. And frankly, the insurance companies are going to cut a fat hog on this, because the insurance companies are going to find that they're going to cover 46 million more folks that they don't now cover. So this is a good thing for them. The only thing that I've heard any real justified squawks on is the fact that they're going to have to eliminate politically the 1099 reporting and disclosures on expenditures of over $600. Now, technically, that's probably good government at work, but it's good government that the people won't accept because it means a lot of paperwork, and folks hate paperwork in case of taxes. And I think if you talk to the average guy who pays taxes, he doesn't mind paying the taxes as much as he minds the damn paperwork, which ties him up for about half a year. So that's the only big change, but the answer is yes, it will evolve. And if we can get the Republicans to talk to us and start working together, I would think that we could make this thing work, make it work well, and make it a good thing. If you go to Europe or to Canada, you'll find two things. One, the people like the programs, and they work. And the other thing that you'll find is that they cost half as much of the gross domestic product as ours does, and half as much of, and they grow at half the rate of our growth in healthcare costs in the United States. Go ahead, Doc.
Question said it took a long time to pass health care. In fact, you worked on it pretty much your whole career in Congress.
55 years, and Dad 23 before me.
And so the question is there any chance that Congress will be able to handle such major things in a quicker period of time going forward, or is health care a unique problem in terms of how long it takes us to do anything?
No. Other great issues in this country have taken a long time. If you go back, you'll find the question of slavery, or taxes, or income taxes, or war and peace, or Middle East, or consumer protection, or clean air, or any of federal aid to education. All these things take a long time. I remember when I came to Congress, federal aid to education was a hot issue, and it took us about 20, 25 years to do that. And a lot of other legislation it has taken a lot of time. We had a huge battle over clean water. And Eisenhower said, well, this is a peculiarly local blight. And you'll remember the joke I cracked about the folks in New Orleans and knowing who flushed their toilet upstream. He finally figured out, that ain't so. And the people said, well, we'd like to drink safe water, and we'd like to be able to fish and swim and do other things. But all these things take time, and you've got to build a consensus. Now, it's harder today than it was when I went to Congress. When I went to Congress, there were about 180 million. Now that's grown to about 300, and a few, some of which are native-born Americans, and a lot of whom are illegals. But the simple fact of the matter is the population has grown, and this makes it harder for us to arrive at a consensus. And, of course, we got a lot of other things to enjoy, like television and computers and stuff. So the end result is folks spend their time on that because it's a lot less stressful than sitting down and worrying about how we're going to solve this problem of Social Security or Medicare or health insurance, or dealing with this mess we have in the Middle East and Egypt and stuff.
Okay. How do you respond to the recent federal district judges' rulings that found that certainly the mandate and perhaps the whole bill was potentially unconstitutional?
Well, I'm going to get in trouble for this, but
On the card, I didn't make it up.
We're on time, man.
Whoever did it, thank you. First of all, bad decision, bad judge, bad interpretation of the law, bad consequences, and I don't think it's going to be sustained. We have now two judges who have held it constitutional and one who did constitutional and one who didn't, or rather than two who didn't. It's interesting to note, and when you hear about my Republican colleagues complaining about activist judges, if you take a look, you'll find that these are no fooling activist judges, because in many instances in connection with this, they have made decisions which the courts say do not need to be addressed, and the courts have the practice, historic practice, of not deciding more than that which is necessary to decide to come to a decision on the case. So I can't tell you what it'll get to this Supreme Court. This Supreme Court has exceeded its powers in the most extraordinary fashion, including on one occasion electing a president.
Okay. Oh, that's more. Okay, just you had mentioned redistricting, and I guess a question that goes to that to some degree is, are congressional districts too big?
Well, you got to look. When I went to Congress, my district was 218,000. Right next door to me, there was a district of 800,000. That was the biggest in the United States. The Supreme Court decision came through requiring districts be exactly equal. And so there was a tremendous cut. The districts went down to about 400,000. You have two things to balance out here. One, is the district too big? And two, is the Congress too big or too small? Back in about 1912, they decided that 435 was as big as they wanted the Congress to be. And now from time to time, they've added one or two to them on a temporary basis, and then out. And I've got to say, it's a lot harder now for me to travel around a district that's about 90 miles square and that has about 700,000 people. And it's going to get a little bigger next time. And that's going to be harder for me. And it's going to be harder for my staff. But this job wasn't set up for my convenience. It was set up for the good of the country, and I'm supposed to serve that district and not whine about how hard I have to work. You'll find a few who do, but I learned a long time ago people don't want to hear you whine about that. But my personal judgment is that 435 is about big enough. They've got a legislature, I think, in Vermont, is it, Michael? That's got about 400, but how much?
New Hampshire.
Is it New Hampshire? Yeah, and I think it's about 600. And my recollection is that they have one member or two in well, anyway, I guess each of them represent about 15 people or something. That's hard. That might be just a little too easy. And so I think the British have 600 in their parliament, and they can't figure out where to seat them all. So every once in a while, when they get something important, they've got all these people coming in, and they've got no place to put them, and they don't know how to conduct a debate under those circumstances. Now, the British are very artful folk, and they figured out how to deal with this. But I'm generally content, and I think my personal convenience about having too many people to serve is not something I'm going to complain about. They might say, we'll get somebody who won't complain about that.
Okay. And I think this may be our last question. You opposed climate change legislation in the last congressional session. People want to know why, and well, what do you think we should do about it?
Not so. Not so. If you look, you will find I supported it. And as a matter of fact, if you look, you will find that that was essentially the bill which I drafted in the Congress prior to the last one. I have never been opposed to addressing the problem of energy conservation or climate change. I've been one who has said these things, and I think you'll find they make sense. The first is, if you're going to do something, you got to do something on which you can get a consensus. It's pretty clear they didn't get a consensus because it went to the Senate and immediately died. So I also said that it's got to work. I remember they had a little Chrysler engineer before the committee one time, and they asked him, they said, now, can you make a car that'll do this? And he said, of course. You want it to run. And that's the question. Can we do something, but will it work? I warned on many occasions that this is going to be one of the most complex pieces of legislation we got, and that we had to have industry together because they provide the jobs that keep this country going. And if you'll remember, we just had an economic downturn that was brought about in good part by the fact that American industry started laying off everybody in sight. And keeping those jobs going is an important part of my responsibility. Cleaning up the air is, but keeping the jobs going is very, very important. So we started 2 Congresses ago to draft legislation that industry could support and the environmentalists could support. And by the great horn spoon, we finished it. But because these things take so much time, we ran out of time. It was my intention to reintroduce this legislation in the next Congress. I lost the chairmanship of the Commerce Committee over this issue. And the environmentalists, who not infrequently don't get too close to the truth, were running around saying I was opposed to this. I have always said it's got to work. And if it doesn't work, it is not good, and we ought not do it. And if you look to see the environmental legislation, the climate change legislation we passed, the left wing started out working like hell to make it more and more tight and tighter and tighter. And the more they worked at it, the harder they found it was to do. And when they finished, they'd written essentially the same bill that I'd written 2 years earlier. So I'm not going to get into this great war about whether I'm for or against climate change legislation. But I'm simply going to tell you that there's no way on God's green earth that this nation can continue importing over 60% of its liquid petroleum hydrocarbons and be safe. And we have to do a lot of things, including going nuclear, moving to natural gas, addressing the problem of hydrofracking, seeing to it that we drive more fuel-efficient automobiles, that we develop electronic and electric and battery-run automobiles, and all kinds of things, including mass transit and high-speed rail, so that we can safely get ourselves into the second half of this century.
Congressman, our time is up. Unless you wanted to add the final word on any topic that you so choose, I want to thank you very much for your remarks and being here today. And this has actually been a fascinating conversation. So,
well, I want to thank you for the great work you did in government. And I'll say hello again, Judy, and thank you all. You're very gracious. I've enjoyed being with you. You bring back good memories. I'm very proud of the time I spent in Georgetown. What this school gave me was an enormous value, and it has been wonderfully good. One of the things I note is every time I look around, I don't see anything that I saw before. When I was here, we had Old North, New North, and Copley, and White Gravener, and that was it. And we had where the playing field is now, it was a deep valley, and where they had a swimming pool. They filled the whole darn thing. And so it has changed, and I'm glad to see. I don't know how many students there are here, but the place was bulging at the seams when I was here, but there were a whole heck of a lot less than there are now. But you're in a great school, and I'm proud that you'd have me, and thank you very much.
Thank you.